So you might be wondering why there's a bunch of Pokemon and a brick and a cat for this video, even though it says Digimon. So this video is actually going to be, I'm actually recording several videos all in a row, and they are all videos that pertain to Oikawa, and Arukenimon, and Mummymon, and the Control-Inspired Digimon, and Malamyotismon. So I'm kind of just recording all of those in one go. This one, the Oikawa one, I think is the first one that's going to go up. So we'll see. If not, then I'll have mentioned something in one of the other videos by then. But the reason we have all of these Pokemon here in the brick is because all these Pokemon are technically kind of not what they appear. Mimikyu is, of course, you know, this dark, twisted thing in disguise, even though I think Mimikyu is adorable. Hoopa, you know, appears to be this mischievous thing, but, you know, can turn into this giant genie thing. Marshadow is, of course, very much depicted as, in the movie, it's kind of depicted as like a bad guy, but we don't 100% get confirmation on that, or if it just gets corrupted by whatever means. Barry is, of course, a god in the disguise of a brick that has multiplied itself in the form of plushies, and has sent them around the world that will continue to help try to, you know, increase his world domination plan. Shaman, of course, can shapeshift into the shaman, you know, sky form. And then, of course, Murpikyu gets, you know, when it's hungry, it gets angry. And, you know, goes all demonic and twisted and everything. And then the reason I'm wearing the shirt with the cat on it is this is Goose from Captain Marvel, so, you know, the cat. Or the Flurkin, for those of you that have actually seen the movie. If you have not seen the movie, go and watch the movie. Or I'm about to spoil something extremely entertaining that happens in the movie. Goose is a Flurkin, and a Flurkin appears to be a cat that has, like, the ability to shoot tentacles out of its mouth. Yeah. And yeah, that's just kind of interesting to watch in the movie the first time. You're just like, okay. But Goose is a good cat. Actually, if I wear this shirt and it's dark out, I can't do it in here because there's still too much light from the window, even with it covered. It has like little tentacles that pop up in the dark. So it glows in the dark. But I don't have the ability to show that right now. I might see if I can find the website where the shirt is from, and mark it. So as I said, these videos are going to be about Oikawa and things that are related to Oikawa. So let's just start with Oikawa, and then I'll subsequently have additional videos that go along with Arukenimon and Mummymon. I'm just going to have their own video that are the Control-Inspired Digimon, and then Malamyotismon. So Oikawa, or Yukio Oikawa, as a child, he was very, very lonely and couldn't find a single person that understood him. And then when he was in middle school, he became friends with Hiroki Hida, who this Hiroki Hida would later, of course, go on to become Cody's father, Cody Hida's father. And they became best friends, and they were like inseparable. And what happens is, as they grew, they had started to become very much interested in like different video games and stuff like that. And they had been able to manage to tap into the digital world through a video game. And they became obsessed with the fact that they could talk to the creatures that were in the digital world. And they both possibly got partnered Digimon. We do meet Oikawa's, it's later on. We never find out what type of a partner Digimon Cody's father had. But they, both being able to communicate with the digital world, and, they would do it for hours and hours and hours, just like having so much fun with this video game. Unfortunately, Hiroki's father, Cody's grandfather, Chikara, became very worried that they were become way too obsessed with this world, this thing, because he didn't understand that, oh, these are actually real things. He just thought that they were obsessed with a video game. And what ends up happening is he eventually just makes them stop. He makes them stop playing and everything, and takes it away probably. And he tried to separate them, but he couldn't quite bring himself to separate them. But he thought that Yukio was a bad influence. But they became so downhearted and so sad and everything because they couldn't communicate with the digital world in any anymore because, Hiroki's father had taken it away from them, had taken away their ability to communicate with the digital world. And eventually, as they grew, they began to study digital code more and more. Hiroki went off and became a police officer, the way that his father had been. And what ends up happening is Oikawa goes and he seems to start studying code even more. The two of them still remain friends, and they still they build there's an image of them making like a Frigimon out of snow, and some other Digimon out of snow and everything. Even when they're adults, they never forgot about the digital world. And what ends up happening is, unfortunately, at some point in this time frame, well, not unfortunately in this case, but Hiroki gets married, and then he has Cody, and it's never 100% stated if Oikawa meets Cody when he's a baby. I would assume that he probably did, but it may have just been that when Hiroki died, because Hiroki, as I said, he became a police officer, and as I mentioned in Cody's video, Hiroki had gone off and he was on duty somewhere in London, and he died there. I'm assuming he may have been investigating something in London, and he unfortunately died there on duty. And this broke Oikawa. Losing his best friend broke Oikawa. But I would assume that the reason that he didn't know who Cody was when he first started interacting with the Digidestined, he hadn't seen, he may have seen Cody when he was a baby or a toddler, but he hasn't seen Cody in, so many years, probably because of the fact that Hiroki's father, Chikara, had probably kind of, forced Oikawa to stay away from them. And we'll get some closure on that in a little bit, but Oikawa then spends the next several years wallowing kind of in self-pity because Cody's father dies, Hiroki dies, around the time frame that the original Digidestined go to the digital world. And then when they come back from the digital world, when they come back for the short interlude where they have to deal with Myotismon, we'll get to Myotismon, where they have to deal with Myotismon, what ends up happening is they defeat Myotismon, and Oikawa is so sad and so depressed and everything. He just lost his best friend. He doesn't have contact with the digital world anymore, but he sees the Digidestined returning to the digital world. He just saw his town, the city where he lived, be taken over by Digimon. And he's like, oh my god, I know what these things are. They're not fake. I didn't imagine them. And, I lost Hiroki, but, it's we see this moment of him holding up this picture of Hiroki towards where, we see, it's a faraway shot of, Tai and the others when they're, going back up into the digital world to go and fight the Dark Masters. And, Oikawa is just crying and everything, and he's, holding up this picture, Hiroki, look, it's the digital world. It's where we always wanted to go. And, all of this stuff. And what ends up happening is, he's just, he's begging for the Digidestined to take him with him, to take him into the digital world, to take him out of this world, because if there would be at least one place where he could still be happy and still have, still be in touch with his memories of Hiroki, it would be the digital world. And it would have been a very interesting thing of what if this had happened, if he had been able to go with them? I might do a video about well, what if this had happened? I might do a video about that. We'll see. But what ends up happening is he hears this voice whisper in his ear of, oh, would you like to go to the digital world? If you, if you allow me to, I don't know if it's, I don't remember how the voice phrases it, but it's if you, will help me, then I will help you get into the digital world. And, Oikawa, in his moment of grief, makes the deal, and he gets, for all intents and purposes, he becomes possessed by Myotismon, by the remaining data from Myotismon. I'll be going over that more, of course, in the Malamyotismon video, because I already did Myotismon and Venomyotismon in the same one, but Malamyotismon gets his own video because he's just a twisted little son of a bitch. But what ends up happening is they, over this next several years, Oikawa ended up working with Kenichi Joji's father. and as a, father, as a geneticist and such. And, as I said, Hiroki became a police officer, and like so much happened with that. But what ends up happening, is, over the next several years, between when, Malamayotis starts, influencing him more and more, he finds Ken, and he finds out, oh, Ken is a Digidestined. How he quite knows this, I don't know, but he's able to determine that Ken is a Digidestined. And Ken, at this point, has had the moment where he's gone to the digital world, he's met Wormmon, him and, they've bonded and everything, and Ken has unfortunately been infected by the dark spore at this point in time, but it's not growing because it doesn't quite have a reason to grow yet. And then, Ken's brother Sam dies. He, gets hit by a car, and Oikawa is at the funeral, and then he also starts sending Ken emails saying, why don't you go back to the digital world? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? It starts influencing Ken, and this starts it's like he feeds on Ken's dark emotions that forces the dark spore to grow. And this then allows him to, this allows Ken to start, turning, slowly become the Digimon Emperor over the next, I think it's like 2 to 3 years or so. He becomes the Digimon Emperor. And then he starts using, the control spires and everything to start, controlling Digimon, and, makes the dark rings and the dark spirals and everything. And Oikawa is just kind of off to the side watching, but like also whispering in like Ken's ear in this same time frame. And what ends up happening is, this is then, the new Digidestined show up, Davis, Yoli, Cody, and then, Kari and TK, of course, show up, and then they eventually, stop Ken and make him their friend. And then we are introduced to, they start making him their friend. It's a slow process, as I've mentioned. It's kind of a slow process for for a little while in there, but they, there ends up being 2 other Digimon that are introduced, are Kenimon and Mummymon. Well, of course, they'll be getting their own video, but they cause so many problems for the Digidestined. Kenimon, of course, has the ability to make the control spires into Digimon, and there's a few other things that, of course, goes along with that. But what ends up happening is, we find out that Oikawa is the one that is in charge of these 2. That he created them with his own DNA and turning it into digital code, and made Kenimon and Mummymon to do his bidding, and they can go into the digital world and come back, but he cannot enter the digital world yet. I'm going to assume this has to do not with the fact that he's an adult, because we see the Digidestined enter the digital world when they are adults, in the epilogue, but I think it has to do with the fact that he does not have a Digivice. And that it's just, obviously having a dark heart does not prevent you from going into the digital world, because Ken, when he's, the Digimon Emperor, can still enter and leave the digital world just fine. But when Oikawa cannot enter, and we find out later that this is, he's prevented from going into the digital world because of the fact that Myotiswan's data is inside of him. And that's preventing him from returning to the digital world. From allowing Oikawa to go to the digital world. And what ends up happening is, of course, Ken and the others are dealing with, Kenimon and Mummymon. And then when the Digidestined are off on the digital world tour, that is when, Kenimon and Mummymon gather up all the kids. And then the first time that we are introduced properly to Oikawa is when he shows up and he tells Ken, okay, I got this van full of kids. It's not quite this blatant about it and everything, or it's blood, but he's like, okay, I've got this van full of kids that want to be like you. They want the dark spore that's inside of you, or they want a copy of it, and they want to become superior beings. And you're either going to come with me and I'm going to take the dark spore from you or make a copy of it, or kind of, I don't know if he's like, or we're going to kill these kids. I don't quite think Oikawa himself would go that far. Myotismon would go that far. He would kill the kids, and then he was like, okay, well, these kids were all useless because they didn't get Ken to do it. I wanted to, it's Kenimon, Mummymon, just kill them, that's fine. because our Digimon and Mummymon do not seem to have any qualms about killing the Digidestined. So I don't think they'd have a problem killing these kids either. But what ends up happening is, of course, Oikawa tells Ken, I need the dark spore from you to put it into these children, to help them grow. And then we get this moment where, after the kids have all been infected with the dark spore, it's been implanted inside of them. I went over this in the dark spore children video. What ends up happening is Oikawa, Mummymon, and Urkinimon kind of go into hiding for a little while. And actually, this is when Black War Greymon returns from the digital world, or comes from the digital world into the real world. He's there to find the reason that he was created and destroy it, I guess. And he goes to try to attack where Oikawa is. This results in the battle that happens between him and Imperial Dramon Fightermon and War Greymon. And they are able to, subdue him, and then eventually just, he gets a talking to by Wormmon and gets scolded a bunch of times. But what ends up happening is Oikawa and Mummymon and Urkinimon are in hiding, and then when Noriko's dark spore grows faster than the others, he shows up, and he drains the energy from the dark flower and absorbs it into himself. And this is when Black War Greymon shows up. This is also when he has had an encounter with Cody, because Cody at one point was following Noriko to keep an eye on her, and Oikawa shows up, and him and Cody end up talking. And he sees on Cody's bag, he sees the name Hida. And he's like, "Are you Hiroki's child?" And I think Cody is like, "How do you know my father's name?" type of a thing. And Cody then ends up talking to his grandfather, and Chikara, the grandfather, explains that, well, your father did have a friend whose name was Oikawa, and kind of tells Cody about his father when he was growing up, and how they had how he'd had this friend and everything. And during the time frame when when he absorbs the power from Noriko, Chikara shows up, and Cody's grandfather shows up, and he tries to talk Oikawa, kind of talk him down from trying to hurt the kid. And I think this is when this happens. It's when this happens. He's trying to talk him down from hurting the kid, and he's like, I remember you, and I remember I've seen you at the gravesite before, and you just at Cody's father's gravesite before, and Hiroki's gravesite, and you look so sad, and maybe I should have said something to you. Should have said something to you sooner. Maybe, we could, I was just so lost in my own sadness that I didn't think anyone else would be as hurting as much, except for, his daughter-in-law and his grandson. But he's like, maybe we could have, maybe we could start over. We can, talk about Hiroki and talk about those memories that we both have of him and everything. And so we get that conversation, and Oikawa seems to be kind of, you must miss him as much as I do. And we see this moment for Oikawa where he's just like, do I want to go and talk to Hiroki's father and his son and his wife, and maybe have that type, have a better relationship with them, and talk to people who miss Hiroki as much as I do, and all this stuff. And it's just like, we see this, like, the cogs kind of turning in his head. And Black War Greymon is there at this point in time. Urkinimon and Mummymon are there, I think, as well. But what ends up happening is Malamyotismon inside of him takes control, and he tries to attack Chikara, tries to attack Cody's grandfather. But this is when Black War Greymon steps in front of the attack and takes the attack to protect Cody's grandfather, which, of course, I've talked about this in the Black War Greymon video before. I talked about this in the Black War Greymon, or depending on how this lands with those ones, I talk about this in the Black War Greymon video. But this is when, then Urkenimon, Mummymon, and Oikawa run away. And a few days later is when, all the kids are gathering at Heightened View Terrace. It is also stated that Oikawa has talked to TK and Matt's mom. And it's like he'd like try to warn her of like, your son should be careful of who they're friends with and such. And apparently back when the Digimon had first appeared in Heightened View Terrace like 8 years ago or whatever the case was, that back then he had come and he'd done a lot of investigative into that, and then later on he came and talked to them more, like after the incident that happened with when Myotismon and all the Digimon were first in the real world at that point in time, and then subsequently he's probably kept a pretty good eye on that. As I said, it's also they also find out, of course, from Ken's parents that Oikawa had worked with Ken's father. I do not remember Ken's father's name. That they had worked together, and that at one point he just kind of, he was kind of a loner on his own, but he had just kind of up and vanished. Oikawa, of course, Cody's father, or Ken's father, explains he was, he was a brilliant geneticist and everything, but he just kind of up and left one day, and we don't know what happened to him, or left a little while ago, and Oikawa has started to gather the children together at Heightened View Terrace, at the bridge at Heightened View Terrace, and he is working on trying to, he uses them to start like chanting and such to help take him to the digital world, because this is where he does this whole explanation of, it's like, I made these two out of my DNA, and, in regards to Urkenimon and Mummymon, and I want to use the kids to take me to the digital world. And he has the same, like on his computer, he has a program that is apparently based on the gate that Myotismon had used to take to the real world, 4 years ago or whatever the case was. And he's trying to use that, but he puts in the wrong card. And between that and the kids and the fact that it's still the digital world trying to keep Myotismon out, they get transported into the world of dreams. And this is where there's this big battle between, Urkenimon and Mummymon are fighting against a bunch of the other Digidestins, Digimon, and stuff like that. And, Oikawa is just like, he's just like so happy to finally get to be in the digital world. And then he looks around and he realizes he's not in the digital world. This is not what it was supposed to be. It doesn't look right. And like all the kids are, all the, the dark spore children are like scared. Like, this is not the digital world. What is going on? And then we get this laughter. This, evil laughter type thing. I can do an evil laugh, but I have to prepare for it, and this is not the time frame for that. I might do that in the Myotismon video. We'll see. But what ends up happening is, of course, there's these giant lips. Rocky Horror Picture Show reference, anyone? There's these giant lips that appear, this mouth that appears, and of course, Gatomon recognizes it. It's just like, I still hear that voice in my nightmares. It's Myotismon. And, Myotismon does this whole explanation of, yeah, I went inside of you, I took over your body, so many years ago and everything, and I've been using you and manipulating you and whispering in your ear for the past however many years, and, soon, I just used you and everything, and then it's disgusting to watch, but he like literally like forces himself out of Oikawa and forms a clone of Oikawa. And then like Oikawa kind of like passes out for a little while. And then once they've kind of defeated Myotismon, which, as I said, Myotismon gets his own video. Once the Digidestined have all defeated Myotismon and helped the Dark Spore children and everything like that, help them, accept the fact that yes, you can be Digidestined too and everything. Cody then goes back into the dream world where Oikawa still is, and he then starts trying to carry Oikawa out of the dream world and into the digital world. And he's trying to be very encouraging of this because he saw the fact that Oikawa had been manipulated by Myotismon, that Oikawa's intentions, in all honesty, of wanting to get to the digital world were quite pure. He wanted to get back to this place where he had been so happy with his friend, with his best friend, And Cody had just come out of an illusion created by Malamoyotismon, of course, where he got to kind of dream about showing the digital world to his father. And Cody can't do that, unfortunately, but he can try to get, Oikawa into the digital world, so Oikawa can at least get to see the digital world one more time. And what ends up happening is, he tries to get Oikawa into the digital world, and Genai says his body is too weak, he can't come in here on his own and everything. And Oikawa looks out at the digital world, and it's like looks kind of barren and rough and worn at the edges and everything. And he's like, digital world doesn't look the way I remember it doing. And Genai explains, well, a lot of data and power was used up to defeat Malamoyotismon. And Oikawa was like, well, what if we use the power of the dream world to try to fix the digital world? And they're like, and Genai's, before he can even get an answer on this, because the world of dreams kind of just acts on your dreams, and Oikawa's dream has kind of shifted from wanting to see the digital world to wanting to protect it, because he was kind of this thing that almost destroyed the digital world because of Malamoyotismon, because he allowed Malamoyotismon to take control of him and use him for the past so many years. And he then is like, okay, and we see him, like, his, like, Cody's holding on to him, he's got, like, his arm, he's kind of like helping carry him and steady him and such. And Oikawa is tall and Cody is short, and it's kind of funny when you see them together, but and what ends up happening is Oikawa starts to glow and he starts to fade, but he's like turning into data. And Cody is like pleading with him, don't do this, Mr. Oikawa, don't die, just, come into the digital world and everything, we'll find another way. And on the ground in front of them has appeared this little tiny green orbish Digimon that looks like a vegetable or a fruit, one of the two, called Digimon. And it says, I was your Digimon, when you and, Hiroki were having, had contact with the digital world, I was your Digimon. And, but, and I missed those times, and I'm so happy to see you again. And Oikawa does, he remembers her. He remembers the Digimon and his, all of his happier days with Hiroki and everything. And then this is when he starts to fade to use his, starts using the power of the dream world to turn himself into data that he can then use to try to heal the digital world. He then, he knows he has a little bit of, very little time left, and he's just like, I'm just going to use it. I'm going to use what little I have left to be able to fix the digital world, because I'm the one that caused these problems, and I want to make up for it. I want to do something to, fix my regret. And he, turns himself into data, and you see all these like data butterflies that start pouring into the digital world from the dream world that are all made from Oikawa. And he tells Cody, just, don't give up on your dreams. And the quote that he uses is like the quote that I have at the end of this video. Don't give up on your dreams and keep going. He's like, maybe if I had had your optimism, I wouldn't have ended up the way that I had. And it goes on. It flies off. The data butterflies all fly off, and they start healing the digital world, becoming a part of the digital world. And we see like the green and the flowers and everything spread over the digital world again, healing it from Oikawa's wish. Unfortunately, they don't show this in the English dub, but it might have been in the Japanese dub or so. But it is like due to Oikawa's death, Digimon, tearfully, was saying goodbye and everything, and then, quickly dies too, which I guess implies that, like, if the Digidestin dies, then the Digimon dies as well. We know that if the Digimon dies, that doesn't mean the Digidestin dies, but in certain cases, it still causes a lot of problems, because it's still that, you're still losing your friend. And then in the epilogue, when we see, TK and the others are there, 2027 in the Digimon timeline. 2027 in the Digimon timeline. And we see the butterflies that are still representative of Oikawa's, spirit still guarding over the digital world. Now, that implies that even though they had the reboot in Digimon Tri, that Oikawa's data is still there, still protecting the digital world. Yes, I know Digimon Tri came out quite a while after Digimon Adventure did, but and the same thing with like Digimon, the last evolution, they came out quite a bit after this. But you still got to take that into context. That was like, okay, we still see it there, so the data still has to be there. It's just that during the time frame of Digimon Adventure Tri and Digimon The Last Evolution, there's not really a reason for them to show them Oikawa's data. And I will put this here as kind of a way of like encouraging the concept that I had of like, when Digidestin reach a certain, not a certain age, but when like their potential stops, that, they lose their Digimon. But what I put this at as Oikawa was at the very, very youngest, in his 30s, possibly closer to his 40s, because I don't think we ever get an exact age on Oikawa. But he had spent so much time trying to find a way to get into the digital world, even with having Malamyotismon inside of him and everything. That was kind of come on, we gotta find a way to get there. Come on, you stupid human. But because Myotismon does not like humans most of the time, and he I will tolerate this Oikawa guy because he's useful and I can use him. Which I'll go over that in the Malamyotismon video. But what ends up happening is, Oikawa has spent the past however many years trying to find a way to get into the digital world, and him and Hiroki have probably both been trying to find ways to get into the digital world at some point. To return to there, not to leave the real world, because Hiroki had his family and everything, and he wouldn't want to leave his wife and his son and his father, but he would probably like to go back to the digital world and get to see the digital world again, and share that with Cody and with his father and his wife and everything, and share that with his with Oikawa. But what I see this as is, Oikawa went through so much, and that he was still a child the last time that he had any contact with the digital world. Last time that he had any contact with Deuterimon. So Deuterimon was there in the digital world. And then during the whole time frame that Oikawa was, growing up, and, him and Hiroki were, becoming adults, and Hiroki becoming a parent and everything. And then, Oikawa losing Hiroki, and then, still being infected by Malamyotismon, that there is a possibility that, Deuterimon at some point in that time frame, because of lack of contact with their Digidestined, or even in regards to Oikawa reaching a certain, his potential limit, that Deuterimon died already, or vanished for a while. And then when Oikawa finally had connection again to the digital world, and when it was shown that he did have this potential again, that Deuterimon then shows up again. Because it's not like it hops out of nowhere, hops off, they're on the other side of the digital world. It's oh, I must get to this part of the digital world, hops their way there. No, it just kind of appears. Deuterimon just appears on the ground in front of Cody and Oikawa. And unfortunately, in regards to the fact that it implies that Oikawa dies, therefore Deuterimon dies. So Oikawa is Deuterimon is kind of was alive again for maybe 5 minutes and then gone again. But it's because Oikawa is technically dead, but he'd been turned into data. So I also put it as because it's when I'm looking on the Wikipedia for this, it's citation needed in regards to when Deuterimon died. So I'm okay, that's possibility number one. We're going to go with the slightly less sad version of possibility number two, that when Oikawa turned himself into data and is now part of the digital world and part of this protection of the digital world, that Deuterimon was, is still alive and can still kind of communicate with Oikawa's data. But maybe one little butterfly likes to, be around Deuterimon a lot. That's the slightly more happy ending that I would slightly prefer, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm the only one that came up with that concept or not. But Oikawa does redeem himself. Mimimon and Arukenimon are destroyed by Malamyotismon, which I'll go over both in their video and the Malamyotismon video, which, considering that this is all that I have to talk about for Oikawa, although I would assume that Cody and his grandfather, they probably did make like a grave marker, have a grave marker made for Oikawa. Maybe they put it next to Hiroki's, so the two of them could still, kind of be together. And like, maybe they, because I know that in Japanese homes a lot of the time they will have, the picture on the wall or in the little shrine thing for like family members that have passed, and we see one there for Hiroki, and it might be that they find one and put that there for Oikawa. And then, it was like this thing of like, okay, he is gone, but as a reminder of not to push away people that need help. And Cody becomes a lawyer later on, so I don't know exactly how that ties into things. But that's what we have for Oikawa. So a little bit longer of a video than I intended it to be, but, I liked where I took it. So I thank you very much for watching. In regards to the other Digi-Destined, I think the next one that I'm going to be talking about in regards to the miscellaneous Digi-Destined or in regards to other Digi-Destined is probably going to be, I want to say Mako, for Mako and Mekumon. It's going to be the next one. But that was going to be a little bit more of a longer one, just because of how much we learn about Mako and Mekumon in Digimon Tri. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.